Morgan Vance sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, checking his Rolex. He wasn't just divorcing his wife of 20 years, he was annihilating her. He had the forensic accountants, the sharks for lawyers, and the mistress waiting in the Porsche downstairs. He had bragged to his partners just that morning that Elise would leave with nothing but the clothes on her back. He thought he was the chess master. But when the heavy oak doors opened and Elise walked in, she wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was holding a single red file folder. And when Morgan's own high-priced lawyer, Arthur, opened that folder, the color drained from his face, and a terrified smile crept onto his lips. Morgan didn't know it yet, but his life was already over. This is the story of the most brutal, satisfying checkmate in divorce history. The champagne flute shattered against the marble fireplace, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the sprawling living room of the estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. "Stop crying, Elise. It's pathetic. Honestly, it's just boring," Morgan Vance said, not even looking up from his phone. He took a sip of his own drink, a 50-year-old Scotch that cost more than most people's cars. "I told you to have the bags packed by noon. It is now 6 p.m. You are trespassing in my house." Elise Vance stood near the archway of the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't a frail woman, but 20 years of marriage to Morgan had a way of eroding a person's spine. She was 43, though she looked tired enough to be 60. She wore a simple grey cardigan and jeans, clothes that Morgan hated because they didn't project the brand. "Morgan," she said, her voice quiet, barely a whisper, "we built this house together. The kids grew up here. You can't just kick me out on a Tuesday." Morgan laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound that lacked any warmth. He walked over to her, looming. At 6'2", with the jawline of a movie star and the eyes of a shark, Morgan was used to shrinking people. He was the CEO of Vance Logistics, a shipping empire that moved goods across 3 oceans. He was the king of the supply chain. "Correction," Morgan sneered, leaning down so his breath hit her face. "I built this house. I paid for the bricks. I paid for the architect. I paid for the landscape artist who planted those roses you love so much. You? You just existed here, Elise. You were a decorative piece that's gone out of style." He pulled away, disgusted, and walked back to the window that overlooked the manicured grounds. Rain was lashing against the glass, a typical New England storm brewing. "I've filed the papers, Elise. My lawyer, Arthur Pennebaker, you know, the one who destroyed the unions last year. He's drafted the motion. It's ironclad. Incompatibility. And thanks to that prenup you signed when you were a starry-eyed, 22-year-old art student, you get a payout. A generous one, really. Enough to rent a condo in, I don't know, Ohio." "I don't want money," Elise said, stepping forward. "I want to know why. Is it her, the secretary, Jessica?" Morgan turned around, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He didn't even have the decency to deny it. "Jessica is 24, Elise. She has a master's degree in business, she speaks 3 languages, and she looks at me like I'm a god. You look at me like I'm a chore. So yes, it's Jessica. It's also the fact that I have outgrown you. I am a global figure now. I need a partner who fits the frame. You're domestic." He checked his watch again. "The driver is outside. He'll take you to the Motel 6 on the interstate. I've booked you a room for 3 nights. After that, you're on your own until the settlement check clears. Don't make a scene, Elise. You know you can't win against me. I own this town. I own the judges. I own the narrative." Elise looked at him. For a second, the trembling in her hands stopped. Her eyes, usually soft and brown, hardened into something resembling obsidian. It was a look Morgan had never seen before, but in his arrogance, he dismissed it as shock. "You're right, Morgan," she said, her voice steadying. "You built the empire. You're the genius." "Glad you finally admit it," he scoffed. "I'll get my coat." Elise walked to the hallway closet. She didn't take the luggage Morgan had demanded she pack. She picked up a single, worn leather tote bag. She put on her raincoat, buttoned it to the chin, and opened the front door. The wind howled, blowing rain into the foyer, soaking the expensive Persian rug. "Close the door!" Morgan yelled, worried about his flaws. Elise stepped out into the storm. She didn't look back. She got into the black town car waiting in the driveway. As the car pulled away, Morgan watched from the window, swirling his scotch. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Jessica," he said, his voice instantly shifting to a purr. "It's done. The witch is gone. Pack your things, babe. You're moving into the master suite tonight, and bring that red dress." He hung up, feeling like the master of the universe. He had bragged to his golf buddies just days ago that leaving Elise would be cheaper than a used Honda. He was convinced he had stripped her of all power. He had no idea that the woman sitting in the back of that town car wasn't going to the Motel 6. She leaned forward and tapped on the glass partition. "Change of plans, driver," Elise said. The driver, a man named Thompson, who had worked for the family for 10 years, and who Morgan treated like garbage, caught her eye in the rearview mirror. "Where to, Mrs. Vance?" "Take me to the staggering district," she said. "Take me to the offices of Sterling, Cooper, and Roth. And Thompson." "Yes, ma'am?" "If Morgan calls you, tell him the reception is bad." Thompson smirked. "Yes, ma'am." Morgan Vance thought he had just taken out the trash. He didn't realize he had just released the Kraken. The law offices of Sterling, Cooper, and Roth were not in the flashy glass skyscrapers where Morgan did his business. They were located in a brownstone in the older, historic part of the city. They didn't advertise on billboards, they didn't chase ambulances. They were the kind of firm you only knew about if you had old money, or if you knew where the bodies were buried. Elise walked into the reception area, dripping wet. The receptionist, an older woman named Martha with silver hair and a stern face, looked up over her spectacles. "I have an appointment with Mr. Sterling," Elise said. "I know it's late." "Mr. Sterling is expecting you, Mrs. Vance," Martha said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Go right in. He's in the library." Elise entered the office. It smelled of old paper, tobacco, and mahogany. Sitting behind a desk that looked like it had survived both world wars was Elias Sterling. He was 70 years old, hunched over, with a face like a road map of a difficult century. He wasn't flashy like Morgan's lawyer, Arthur Pennebaker. Arthur wore Italian suits. Elias wore cardigans. But Arthur was a shark. Elias was a leviathan. "Elise," Elias said, not rising, but gesturing to a leather wingback chair. "You're wet. It's raining, Elias." "It always rains when the truth comes out," the old lawyer muttered. "So, he finally did it?" "Tonight," Elise said, sitting down. She didn't take off her coat. She felt cold, a chill that went deeper than her skin. "He kicked me out. He's moving Jessica in." Elias nodded slowly, tapping a fountain pen against his desk. "And the prenup?" He waved it in my face. "He thinks it limits me to the alimony cap set in 2003. $5,000 a month for 5 years, plus the lump sum of 200 grand. Elias let out a dry chuckle that sounded like leaves rustling on pavement. Morgan always was a man who looked at the headlines and never read the fine print. He thinks he's the smartest man in the room because he yells the loudest. Elise reached into her tote bag. She pulled out a series of bound documents. They weren't legal papers, not yet. They were journals, ledgers, handwritten notes. "He bragged about it, Elias," Elise said, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and grief. "He told his friends at the club that he was dumping the old stock. He told them I was stupid, that I didn't understand business, that I was just a housewife who got lucky." She placed the journals on the desk. "For 15 years, Morgan brought his work home," Elise continued. "He'd get drunk and complain about the offshore accounts. He'd leave his laptop open because he thought I was too stupid to understand what a shell company was. He thought because I was painting watercolors in the garden, I wasn't listening when he took calls on speakerphone about the Cayman transactions." Elias picked up one of the journals. He opened it. It was written in Elise's neat, cursive handwriting. It contained dates, times, transaction numbers, and quotes. June 12, 2018. Morgan transferred $4.5 million from the Logistics Operational Fund to Blue Heron LLC. He claimed it was for fleet maintenance. Blue Heron LLC is registered to Jessica's brother in Nevis. October 4th, 2020. Morgan falsified the tax returns regarding the depreciation of the shipping containers. He laughed about saving $12 million in taxes. He signed the documents while drinking wine I poured him. Elias looked up, his eyes twinkling behind his thick glasses. "You've been keeping a diary." "I've been keeping a forensic audit, Elias," Elise corrected him. "But there's more. The business. Vance Logistics." "Yes?" "When we started, Morgan had nothing. His credit was shot from his failed tech startup. He couldn't get a loan for the first warehouse." "I recall," Elias said. "He claimed he got a private investor." "He did," Elise said softly. "Me." Elias paused. "You?" "My grandmother left me a trust. It wasn't huge, but it was liquid. Morgan knew I had money, but he didn't know the structure. I loaned the company the seed money through a holding company called Ares Ventures. He signed the agreement thinking Ares was some faceless venture capital firm in New York. He was so desperate for the cash he didn't do due diligence on who owned Ares." Elise leaned forward, her eyes locking with the old lawyer's. "I own Ares Ventures, Elias, and the loan agreement Morgan signed in 2005. It had a conversion clause. In the event of a default, or in the event of a change of control attempt, which a divorce filing triggers under the corporate charter, Ares Ventures has the option to convert the debt into equity." Elias Sterling's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. He pulled a dusty law book off a stack and opened a file on his computer. "Convert into how much equity?" Elise smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. 51%. The silence in the room was heavy. Elias Sterling, a man who had practiced law for 50 years, sat back in his chair and let out a long, low whistle. "So," Elias said, looking at the ceiling, "Morgan thinks he owns the company. But strictly speaking, if we trigger this clause, he works for you." "He works for me," Elise confirmed, "and he's been embezzling from my company to buy his mistress condos." "This isn't a divorce case anymore, Elise," Elias whispered, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. "This is a corporate hostile takeover and a criminal investigation." "He wanted a war," Elise said, standing up and buttoning her coat. "He wanted to show everyone how powerful he is. I want you to set up the meeting, Elias. He wants a deposition." "Fine, let's give him one." "I'll call Arthur Pennebaker in the morning," Elias said. "I'll tell him we accept the meeting. I'll tell him you're ready to surrender." "Good," Elise said. "Let him think he's won. Let him brag for a few more days. I want the fall to hurt." Elise turned to leave. "Where are you going to stay?" Elias asked. "The Ritz," Elise said. "Charge it to the company card. After all, As the majority shareholder, I think I'm entitled to a business expense. 3 days later, Morgan Vance was holding court at L'Argent, the most exclusive steakhouse in the city. The lighting was dim, the banquettes were velvet, and the air smelled of truffle oil and money. "To Arthur!" Morgan bellowed, raising a glass of Cabernet that cost $400 a bottle. "The man who turns ironclad marriages into wet tissue paper." The table erupted in laughter. Seated around Morgan were his usual sycophants: Trent, a hedge fund manager with a gambling problem; Brad, a real estate developer who was currently being sued by 3 different municipalities; and of course, Jessica. Jessica was wearing the red dress Morgan had demanded. It was low-cut, tight, and clearly designed to make a statement. She sat close to Morgan, her hand resting possessively on his thigh, a diamond bracelet, one that had belonged to Elisa's mother, glittering on her wrist. Morgan had given it to her that morning, claiming Elise had left it behind. Arthur Pennebaker sat opposite them. He was a slick man, with hair gelled back so severely it looked like a helmet. He didn't laugh as loudly as the others. He smiled the smile of a man who billed by the minute. "You flatter me, Morgan," Arthur said, slicing into his Wagyu beef. "But honestly, Elise made it easy. She walked out. Abandonment of the marital home. It's a textbook mistake. It implies she has nowhere to go, no resources to fight. It signals defeat." "She's probably staying at a shelter," Jessica giggled, taking a sip of her martini. "Or maybe she went back to that awful little town in Ohio she talks about." "She's not in Ohio," Morgan said, waving his hand dismissively. "I got a notification from the joint credit card before I cut it off." She checked into the Ritz-Carlton. The table went silent for a split second before Trent burst out laughing. "The Ritz? With what money? She'll be washing dishes by Friday to pay the bill." "Let her have her last hurrah," Morgan sneered. "It's sad, really. She's trying to keep up appearances. She thinks if she acts rich, I'll be intimidated. But the reality is, I am Vance Logistics. I am the revenue stream. She's just a leak in the hull that I've finally plugged." Arthur wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "About the settlement conference tomorrow, Morgan. Elias Sterling called. He's representing her." Morgan paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Sterling? The fossil? I thought he retired 10 years ago. Is he even alive?" "He's very much alive," Arthur said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "He's old school. He doesn't litigate. He negotiates. He called to say Elise is ready to sign. She just wants to do it in person. She wants closure." "Closure," Morgan rolled his eyes. "Women and their closure. She wants to cry at me one last time. She wants me to tell her I'm sorry so she can sleep at night. I suggest we give it to her," Arthur advised. "We go in, we look solemn, you nod your head while she sobs, she signs the papers, and we walk away with 95% of the assets. If we deny the meeting, Sterling might drag this out in court just to bill ours. Let's get it over with." "Fine," Morgan grunted. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m. But Jessica comes with me." Arthur hesitated. "Morgan, bringing the mistress to the divorce settlement is aggressive, even for you." "It's not aggressive, Arthur. It's assertive," Morgan said, looking at Jessica, who was beaming at the idea. "I want Elise to see the future. I want her to see that she has been replaced by a newer, better model. It will crush any hope she has of reconciliation. I want her broken, Arthur. Completely broken. That way she never comes back asking for more." Morgan took another drink, feeling the warmth of the alcohol and the thrill of total control. He looked around the restaurant, believing every eye was on him, admiring him. He didn't notice the man sitting 2 tables away, hidden behind a large newspaper and a potted palm. It was a private investigator named Miller, a man Elias Sterling had hired 24 hours ago. Miller adjusted his glasses, snapped a photo of the diamond bracelet on Jessica's wrist with a long-range lens, and sent the image to Elise with a simple caption, Exhibit G, Dissipation of Marital Assets. Morgan Vance thought he was celebrating a victory. In reality, he was providing the ammunition for his own execution. While Morgan was drinking vintage wine, Elise Vance was drinking lukewarm coffee in a small, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city. She wasn't wearing the designer clothes Morgan had bought her over the years. She was wearing a sharp, navy blue blazer she had bought at a department store that morning. It was businesslike, severe, and commanding. Across from her sat Jasper Thorne. Jasper was the CFO of Vance Logistics. He was a quiet man, a nervous man who chewed on his cuticles. He had worked for Morgan for 12 years, and for 12 years, Morgan had bullied him. Morgan called him the calculator and frequently humiliated him in board meetings. "I shouldn't be here, Elise," Jasper said, looking out the window as if expecting a sniper. "If Morgan finds out I'm talking to you, he'll kill me. Professionally, I mean. He'll blacklist me." "Morgan can't blacklist you, Jasper," Elise said calmly, "because Morgan isn't going to be the CEO for much longer." Jasper looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about? He owns the board. He owns the voting shares." Elise slid a folder across the table. It wasn't the red folder she would take to the meeting. This was a black one. "You know about Ares Ventures, Jasper?" Jasper nodded slowly. "The primary debt holder. We owe them millions. The interest payments alone are choking our cash flow." "I am Ares Ventures," Elise said. Jasper dropped his spoon. It clattered loudly against the ceramic mug. "You? But Morgan said it was a syndicate out of Hong Kong." "Morgan lies," Elise said. "He lies to you. He lies to the IRS. And he lied to me. But I didn't come here to talk about debt conversion. Jasper. I know about the other books." Jasper's face went pale. "I don't know what you mean." "The Phantom Fleet," Elise whispered. "The 3 cargo ships that don't officially exist. The ones Morgan uses to transport unmanifested cargo from South America. I found the logs in his home office safe, Jasper. I know he forces you to sign off on the fuel costs for ships that aren't on the company registry." Jasper put his head in his hands. He was trembling. "He made me. He said if I didn't do it, he'd frame me for the embezzlement. He has emails, Elise. He hacked my account. He made it look like I authorized the transfers to his offshore accounts." Elise reached across the table and placed her hand over Jasper's. Her touch was firm, motherly, but strong. "I know, Jasper. I saw the emails, too. I know they are fakes. The timestamps don't match the server logs. I have a forensic IT guy ready to testify that those emails were created on Morgan's laptop." Jasper looked up, tears in his eyes. "You do?" "I do," she said. "But I need you to stand up. Tomorrow morning, I'm walking into Arthur Pennebaker's office. I'm going to take everything from Morgan. But I need the CFO to validate the financial triggers. I need you to walk in there 5 minutes after I do and hand over the real P&L statements." "He'll destroy me," Jasper whispered. "He is already destroying you," Elise countered. "Look at you, Jasper. You're a wreck. You haven't slept in months. You're terrified of your own shadow. Is this the life you want? Or do you want to be the CFO of a clean, legitimate company? A company run by someone who respects you?" "You?" Jasper asked. "Me," Elise said. "I'm taking over, Jasper, and I'm giving you a raise, and a bonus, and immunity, provided you turn state's witness if the DOJ gets involved." Jasper stared at her. He had known Elise as the quiet wife who brought cookies to the company Christmas party. He had never seen this woman before. This was a woman made of steel. He took a deep breath, the first full breath he had taken in years. 10 o'clock? Jasper asked. 10 o'clock, Elise confirmed. Don't be late. She stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table. She walked out of the diner, her head held high. She wasn't just a scorned wife anymore. She was a CEO in waiting, and she was about to launch a hostile takeover of her husband's life. The morning of the meeting, the sky was a brilliant, hard blue. The storm had passed, leaving the city scrubbed clean. At the offices of Pennebaker and Associates, located on the 40th floor of the finest skyscraper in the financial district, the mood was celebratory. Arthur Pennebaker had ordered pastries. He had his paralegals prepare the final divorce decree. It was a savage document. It gave Elise the car, a 5-year-old Mercedes, her personal jewelry, excluding anything purchased in the last 12 months, and a lump sum that amounted to less than 1% of Morgan's net worth. Morgan arrived at 9:45 a.m. He looked like he had stepped out of a GQ photo shoot. He wore a charcoal Italian suit, a silk tie, and a watch that cost more than the median American income. Jessica was on his arm, wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like something one would wear to a rehearsal dinner. She was chewing gum, a habit Morgan usually hated, but today he ignored it. He was too high on adrenaline. "Where is she?" Morgan asked, striding into the conference room and throwing his briefcase on the table. "Let's get this over with. I have a tea time at noon." "She's not here yet," Arthur said, checking his phone. "Sterling said they'd be here at 10 sharp. Relax, Morgan. Grab a croissant." "I don't want a croissant. I want my freedom," Morgan said, pacing the room. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the city. "Look at it, Jessica. All those little ants down there. They work their whole lives to get what I make in a week." "You're amazing, baby," Jessica cooed, scrolling through Instagram on her phone. At 9:55 a.m., the elevator doors down the hall chimed. Arthur Pennebaker straightened his tie. "Showtime. Remember, Morgan, let me do the talking. You just look bored." "I am bored," Morgan said, sitting at the head of the table. The heavy glass doors of the conference room opened. Elias Sterling entered first. The old lawyer looked frail, using a cane to walk, his cardigan appearing threadbare in the harsh fluorescent lights of the modern office. He carried a battered leather briefcase. Morgan snorted. "Arthur, did he dig that briefcase out of a dumpster?" Arthur kicked Morgan under the table. Then Elise entered. The room seemed to drop a few degrees in temperature. She wasn't crying. She wasn't wearing the dowdy clothes Morgan remembered. She was wearing a white power suit, crisp, tailored, and immaculate. It was a direct visual challenge to Jessica's white dress. But where Jessica looked cheap, Elise looked regal. Her hair was cut into a sharp bob. Her makeup was flawless. She carried nothing but a single bright red file folder. "Hello, Morgan," she said. Her voice was cool, devoid of any emotion. She didn't look at Jessica. To Elise, Jessica was furniture. "Elise," Morgan said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "You look different. Spent your settlement check already on a makeover? That's reckless." "I haven't spent a dime of your money, Morgan," she said, taking the seat at the opposite end of the long table. Elias sat next to her, arranging his papers with agonizing slowness. "Let's cut the chit-chat," Arthur Pennebaker interrupted, sliding a thick stack of documents down the table. "This is the agreement. It reflects the terms of the prenuptial agreement signed 20 years ago. We've been generous and included a clause allowing you to keep the summer cottage in Maine, provided you assume the mortgage." "Generous," Elias Sterling wheezed. a dry, rattling sound. "Arthur, you always did have a sense of humor." "It's a standard offer, Elias," Arthur shot back. "Take it or leave it. If you leave it, we go to trial, and I will bury you in motions until your client is bankrupt." Elise didn't even look at the papers Arthur had slid toward her. She kept her hand resting on the red folder. "I'm not signing those, Arthur," Elise said. Morgan slammed his hand on the table. "Then why the hell are we here? I told you, Arthur. She just wants attention." He glared at Elise. "Listen to me, you leech. You sign that paper, or I swear to God, I will make sure you never work in this state. I will ruin your reputation. I will tell everyone you were unstable, an alcoholic. I'll make up whatever I have to." Jessica giggled. "He'll do it too." Elise finally looked at Jessica. It was a brief, pitying glance. Then she turned her eyes back to Morgan. "Are you done?" Elise asked. "I'm done when I say I'm done," Morgan shouted. "Actually," Elise said, opening the red folder, "you were done about 6 months ago. You just didn't know it." She pulled out a single piece of paper and slid it down the table. It wasn't a legal pleading. It wasn't a divorce petition. It was a photocopy of a birth certificate. Morgan looked at it, confused. "What is this? Who is Leo Vance?" "Look at the date, Morgan," Elise said. Morgan squinted. The date was from 14 years ago. The mother listed was a woman named Veronica Miller. The father was Morgan Vance. The room went dead silent. Jessica stopped chewing her gum. "I don't know what this is," Morgan stammered, his face flushing red. "This is a fake. Who is this?" "Veronica was your executive assistant in 2009, Elise said calmly. "You paid her $200,000 to keep the baby quiet and move to Oregon. You used company funds to do it. You labeled it as consulting fees in the ledger." Arthur Pennebaker grabbed the paper. His face went pale. "Morgan, tell me you didn't use corporate funds for hush money." "It doesn't matter," Morgan yelled. "So what? I had a kid. Big deal. That has nothing to do with our divorce. The prenup holds." "Actually," Elias Sterling spoke up, his voice suddenly strong and clear, "the prenup has a fidelity clause. A bad boy clause, I believe you called it, Arthur. If Morgan committed adultery that resulted in a child, the prenup is void." Arthur looked at Morgan with horror. "You told me there were no children. You swore it." "I handled it," Morgan screamed. "It was handled." "But the use of company funds," Elise continued, her voice rising slightly. "That's the interesting part, because that's not just a breach of the prenup. That's embezzlement. And since Vance Logistics is a publicly traded company now, that's a federal crime." Morgan stood up, his chair flying back. "You can't prove any of that. That's just a piece of paper." Elise smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of the executioner. "I don't have to prove it, Morgan. He does." She pointed to the door. The door opened. Jasper Thorne walked in. He was clutching a stack of ledgers to his chest like a shield. "Jasper," Morgan whispered, the color draining from his face. "What are you doing here?" Jasper looked at Morgan, then at Elise. He took a deep breath and walked to Elise's side of the table. He placed the ledgers in front of her. "I'm here to surrender the true accounts to the majority shareholder," Jasper said, his voice shaking but distinct. "Majority shareholder," Morgan laughed nervously. "I'm the majority shareholder, you idiot." "No," Arthur Pennebaker said. He was reading a document Elias had just handed him. His hands were shaking. Oh my God, Ares Ventures. Arthur looked up at Elise, and for the first time the shark looked terrified. "You own the debt," Arthur whispered, "and you've triggered the conversion clause." "That's right, Arthur," Elise said, leaning forward. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I filed the paperwork with the SEC. I own 51% of Vance Logistics. I am the CEO. And my first act of business is to fire Morgan for gross misconduct and embezzlement. Arthur Pennebaker looked from the documents to Elise, and then, slowly, a smile crept onto his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a smile of pure shock and professional admiration for a trap well sprung. He looked at his client, Morgan, who was standing there with his mouth open, looking like a fish on a dock. "Well, Morgan," Arthur said, closing his file, "it seems you have a problem." The silence in the conference room was shattered by Morgan's laughter. It was a desperate, unhinged sound. "You're bluffing," Morgan spat, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You can't just take my company. I built it. It's my name on the building, Vance Logistics." "It's your name," Elise replied, her voice steady as a judge's gavel. "But it's my money. And legally, as of this morning, the board has already met. Since I control the voting shares, I appointed myself interim chairwoman. My first motion was to remove the CEO for cause. The motion passed unanimously." "Unanimously?" Morgan roared. "Who else voted?" "I did," Jasper Thorne said quietly. "I hold 2% of the stock options, Morgan. You gave them to me 5 years ago, instead of a Christmas bonus. Remember? You said they were worthless paper." Morgan lunged across the table toward Jasper. "You traitor! I'll kill you!" 2 large men in dark suits, whom Morgan had assumed were Arthur's paralegals, stepped forward from the back of the room. They blocked Morgan easily, forcing him back into his chair. "These are private security," Elise noted, "and the police are waiting in the lobby. We have a forensic audit regarding the 3 Phantom ships, Morgan. The FBI is particularly interested in the cargo. It seems transporting undeclared lithium batteries is quite illegal." Morgan looked at Arthur Pennebaker. "Arthur, do something! Fix this! Sue her! Get an injunction!" Arthur Pennebaker was slowly packing his briefcase. He looked at the birth certificate, then at the financial ledgers Jasper had brought, and finally at his client. "Morgan," Arthur said, his voice cold. "You paid my retainer from the Blue Heron account. If that account is proven to be proceeds of embezzlement, I can't touch that money. It's fruit of the poisonous tree, which means—" Arthur clicked his briefcase shut. "I'm not currently being paid, and I don't work for free." "You're firing me?" Morgan screamed. "Now?" "I'm recusing myself," Arthur corrected. "I recommend you get a public defender. You're going to need one for the criminal charges." Arthur nodded politely to Elise and Elias Sterling, then walked out of the room without looking back. Morgan turned to the last person in his corner. "Jessica, baby, listen to me. It's just a setback. We still have the house. We still have the offshore accounts." Jessica stood up. She looked at Morgan with an expression of pure revulsion. She had heard the words FBI, embezzlement, and public defender. She calculated the odds faster than a computer. "The offshore accounts are frozen, Morgan," Elise interjected kindly. "And the house, the mortgage was paid by the company. That's a company asset. I'm evicting you, today." Jessica pulled her arm away from Morgan's grasping hand. "I didn't know anything about this," she said loudly, looking directly at Elise and the security guards. "I was just an employee. He lied to me too. I'm a victim here." "Jessica," Morgan gasped. "We're soulmates." "I'm 24, Morgan," she snapped. "I'm not going to federal prison for an old man with no money. I'm taking an Uber." She grabbed her purse. "And I'm keeping the bracelet." "Actually," Elise said, "that bracelet is listed on the insurance rider for my mother's estate. If you walk out with it, I'll have you arrested for grand larceny within the hour." Jessica froze. She looked at Elise's steel gaze. Slowly, furiously, She unclasped the diamond bracelet and slammed it onto the table. "I hope you rot," Jessica hissed at Morgan and stormed out. Now, it was just Morgan, alone. The king of the supply chain was reduced to a man in a suit he could no longer afford, in a room he was being kicked out of. He looked at Elise. For the first time in 20 years, he saw her. Not as the furniture, not as the mother, but as the architect of his reality. "Elise," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, we have history. Don't do this. Don't send me to jail. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll go to Ohio. Just give me a chance." Elise stood up. She walked over to him. She didn't slap him. She didn't scream. She leaned down and whispered in his ear. "You said I was boring, Morgan. You said I was a bad investment. I'm just liquidating my assets." She turned to the security guards. "Get him out of my building." As Morgan was dragged out, protesting and crying, Elise didn't watch. She sat in the chair he had vacated, the head of the table. "Now," she said to Jasper and Elias, "let's get to work. We have a company to save." The first month after the hostile takeover was not the victory lap many expected. It was a war of attrition. When the news broke that Morgan Vance, the king of the supply chain, had been escorted out of his own building in handcuffs, Vance Logistics' stock plummeted by 30% in a single afternoon. Wall Street hates uncertainty, and they hated the idea of a housewife taking the helm of a Fortune 500 shipping empire even more. The financial press was vicious. The Wall Street Journal ran an op-ed titled "The Death of a Logistics Giant." CNBC pundits laughed openly, predicting Elise would bankrupt the company within the quarter. They called her a placeholder, a scorned woman with a checkbook, and a disaster waiting to happen. Elise Vance pinned those articles to the whiteboard in her new office. She didn't move into Morgan's massive, cavernous office immediately. Instead, she set up a command center in the conference room. She needed transparency, not isolation. "They think we're bleeding out," Elise said, looking at the red trend lines on the monitors. It was 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the confrontation. The room was filled with forensic accountants, crisis management PR reps, and a very exhausted Jasper Thorne. "We are bleeding out, Elise," Jasper said, rubbing his temples. "The SEC has frozen the liquid assets pending the investigation into the Phantom Fleet. We have payroll on Friday. If we miss it, the unions walk. If the unions walk, the cargo rots. If the cargo rots, we're done." Elise looked at Jasper. The nervous man who used to tremble when Morgan raised his voice was gone. In his place was a man who was tired, yes, but focused. He was crunching numbers as if his life depended on it, because his professional reputation did. "We're not missing payroll," Elise stated firmly. "We're short $4 million, Jasper countered. "Banks won't touch us with the FBI raiding the warehouse in Jersey." "Then liquidate the executive perks," Elise said. "All of them." Jasper paused. "All of them?" "Sell the corporate retreat in Aspen," she ordered, pacing the room. "Sell the helicopter. Cancel the lease on the luxury box at the stadium. And Morgan's car collection that the company leases for promotional purposes. Auction it tomorrow." That's a fire sale," one of the accountants stammered. "We'll get pennies on the dollar." "I don't care about the dollar value," Elise snapped, her voice sharp. "I care about the message. Morgan built a company on ego. I'm rebuilding it on efficiency. Get it done." By Friday, payroll was met. The unions stayed. And slowly, the bleeding stopped. While Elise fought to save the company, Morgan Vance was fighting to save his life. The downfall of Morgan was not the quick, clean break he had hoped for. It was a slow, humiliating public dismembering. Because he couldn't afford Arthur Pennebaker anymore, he was represented by a court-appointed defense team who seemed more interested in minimizing their workload than fighting for his innocence. But the nail in the coffin wasn't the forensic accounting. It was Jessica. When the FBI threatened Jessica with conspiracy charges for her role in hiding assets, charges that carried a potential 5-year sentence, she didn't just fold, she sang. She provided the district attorney with text messages, voice memos, and the location of a safe deposit box in Zurich that Morgan had sworn only he knew about. Elias Sterling, despite being retired, attended every day of the pre-trial hearings, reporting back to Elise over tea in her office. "She destroyed him, Elise," Elias said, one rainy afternoon, 3 months into the ordeal. Jessica took the stand for the grand jury. She testified that Morgan explicitly told her the phantom ships were for dark money. She painted him as the mastermind and herself as the naive girlfriend. Was she naive? Elise asked, staring out the window at the grey city skyline. Not in the slightest, Elias chuckled dryly. But the jury liked her more than they liked Morgan. He yelled at the prosecutor, Elise. He actually lost his temper and told the U.S. attorney that he didn't understand how business worked. It was spectacular suicide. The plea deal came 2 weeks later. To avoid a trial that would have likely resulted in a 20-year sentence under the RICO Act, Morgan Vance pled guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of tax evasion, and 1 count of embezzlement. The sentence was 7 years in a federal correctional facility, restitution of $25 million, and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer of a publicly traded company. Elise didn't go to the sentencing. She didn't watch it on TV. She was too busy negotiating a contract with a European distributor that Morgan had been too arrogant to court. When the news alert popped up on her phone, former CEO sentenced to 7 years, she simply swiped it away and went back to her spreadsheet. 6 months in the atmosphere at Vance Logistics had shifted entirely. The bro club culture that Morgan had cultivated was systematically dismantled. Elise fired the VP of sales, who had a reputation for sexual harassment, a man Morgan had protected for a decade because he brought in the numbers. She replaced him with a woman named Sarah, who had been languishing in middle management for years, despite being the smartest person in the department. The office, which once smelled of stale cigar smoke and fear, now hummed with a quiet, collaborative energy. One morning, Elise walked into the break room to find Jasper laughing. He was telling a joke to a group of junior analysts. When he saw Elise, he didn't flinch or hide. He smiled. "Morning, boss," Jasper said. "Morning, Jasper," she replied, pouring herself a coffee. "Are the Q3 projections ready?" "On your desk," he said. "And Elise? We're in the black." Elise froze. "Operating profit?" "Net profit," Jasper beamed. "After the legal fees, after the fines, after the restructuring costs, we made money this quarter. Real money, not creative accounting money." Elise felt a lump form in her throat. She had done it. She hadn't just survived, she had succeeded. "Good," she said, masking her emotion with a professional nod. "Then let's talk about bonuses, real ones, for everyone, not just the C-suite." The final ghost to exorcise was the house. The Greenwich estate had been on the market for months. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in their marriage. Too big, too cold, designed to impress strangers rather than comfort a family. Before the closing, Elise went back one last time. The movers had already cleared the furniture. The house echoed with the sound of her heels on the marble floors. She walked into the master bedroom. She remembered the night Morgan had kicked her out. She remembered the feeling of smallness, of worthlessness. She looked at the spot where he had stood, swirling his scotch, telling her she was boring. She walked to the closet where he had kept his 300 suits. It was empty now, just a cavern of cedar and wire hangers. "Mrs. Vance?" Elise turned. It was Thompson, her driver, and now head of her personal security. He was standing in the doorway, looking concerned. "The realtor is here for the keys," Thompson said softly. "I'm coming," Elise said. "You know." Thompson hesitated, stepping a little closer. "I drove him for 10 years. He never asked me about my kids. Not once. Last week, you asked me how my daughter's piano recital went." Elise smiled, sad, genuine smile. "How did it go?" "She crushed it," Thompson grinned. "Beethoven." "Good," Elise said. "Let's go, Thompson. I don't live here anymore." She handed the keys to the realtor at the door and walked out. She didn't look back at the house. There was no nostalgia, only the relief of shedding a skin that no longer fit. 1 year later. The anniversary of the takeover was marked not with champagne, but with an art show. Elise had always painted. In the early years of their marriage, before Morgan became obsessed with status, he used to love her watercolors. But as he climbed the ladder, he started calling her art a cute hobby, and eventually a waste of time. He refused to let her hang her work in the house, claiming it clashed with the interior designer's vision. Tonight, the Silent Storm Gallery in the Arts District was packed, but they weren't there because Elise was a CEO. Most of the patrons didn't even know who she was in the business world. They were there for the art. Her collection was titled Deconstruction. It featured stark, powerful, abstract pieces, jagged lines of black and grey engaging with soft, resilient waves of blue and gold. Critics called it hauntingly triumphant. Elias Sterling moved through the crowd, leaning heavily on his cane. He found Elise standing near the centerpiece of the collection, a massive canvas depicting a storm breaking against a lighthouse. "You have a buyer for this one," Elias said, gesturing to the painting. "A collector from Tokyo. He's offering quite a sum." "I'm not selling this one," Elise said, sipping sparkling water. "This one is for me." "Fair enough," Elias nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket. "I have something for you. It arrived at my office this morning, from the correctional facility." The mood shifted instantly. Elise looked at the white envelope in Elias's hand. It was cheap prison stationery. "He writes every month," Elias said quietly, "usually to ask for money or to complain about the public defender. This one is different. He knows it's the 1-year mark." Elise took the letter. She felt the weight of it. She could imagine Morgan sitting in a concrete cell, writing this. Was he sorry? Was he angry? Was he still the same man who thought he was a king? She looked at Elias. "What does it say?" "I don't know," Elias admitted. "I didn't open it, but Arthur Pennebaker visited him last week. Arthur told me Morgan looks old. He's working in the laundry detail. He told Arthur that he realized something." "And what was that?" "He realized that he didn't build the company," Elias said. "He realized he was just the face, and you were the spine. He wanted you to know that he knows." Elise looked at the envelope again. For a moment, she felt a flicker of pity. It was the pity one feels for a wounded animal that bit you because it didn't know any better. But she also felt the phantom pain of 20 years of suppression. She thought about the woman who had walked out into the rain with a tote bag. She thought about the woman who had stared down a boardroom of sharks. She thought about the artist standing here tonight. "He wants validation," Elise said softly. "He wants me to read this and feel something. He wants to know that he still has the power to occupy my mind." "Probably," Elias agreed. Elise walked over to the reception desk, where a small shredder sat for disposing of credit card receipts. He doesn't get to occupy space in my life anymore, Elias. Not even in my thoughts. She fed the unopened envelope into the shredder. The machine whirred, a harsh mechanical sound that cut through the soft jazz playing in the gallery. The paper turned into confetti. "That," Elise said, dusting off her hands, "is closure." "You're a cold woman, Elise Vance." Elias smiled, his eyes twinkling with pride. "I learned from the best," she replied. At that moment, Jasper Thorne walked in, holding a massive bouquet of flowers. He was followed by Sarah, Thompson, and even the old receptionist, Martha. They weren't her employees tonight. They were her family. "Speech!" Jasper shouted, raising a glass. Elise turned to the room. She looked at the art she had created. She looked at the company she had saved. She looked at the life she had built from the ashes of a disaster. "I don't have a speech," Elise said, her voice ringing clear and strong. "I just have a reminder. Never let anyone tell you that you are just anything. You are not just a wife, not just an employee, not just a stepping stone. You are the architect of your own life. And if someone tries to tear it down..." She smiled, a dangerous, beautiful smile. "Make sure you own the mortgage." The room erupted in applause. Elise raised her glass, not to revenge, but to the sweetest victory of all, indifference to those who hurt you, and success for those who stood by you. The king was gone. Long live the queen. And that is the incredible story of Elise Vance. She proved that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one listening, taking notes, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Morgan thought he was the king, but he forgot that in chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. What did you think of Elise's revenge? Do you think Morgan deserved 7 years in prison, or was losing his fortune punishment enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story about karma coming back around. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.